difficulties, it seems like. So like I said, welcome to How to Hybrid, a masterclass on managing distributed sales teams. We are, for those of you who don't know, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our 20,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. We do that through great live sessions like what you're about to experience today, through our robust online forum, and in the near future, in-person events. For those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. If you don't hesitate to drop the team a note via modernsaleshq.com. Before we get started, one thing I wanted to chime in on, if you like this content, you'll love the Mega SKO happening January 18th through 20th. We're taking a stand against the traditional boring SKO format and serving up an incredible experience for our entire community. You can get registered at themegasco.splashslat.com, and I'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat as well. Got to make sure I'm doing the right chat. So before we get started, I send it to Pete behind the scenes in the speaker chat. That's not helpful. So before we get started and before I pass everything off to Pete, there's a couple housekeeping things. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Pete, I'll give you access while I run through these. So great to have you all here. Really excited to dive in. But first, let's go over some housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to get to them during the event. But that being said, enough about me, enough about MSP. Today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Atrium. I'm going to go ahead and let Pete introduce Atrium himself and run the show from here. I'll be back on for a few closing notes at the end, but Pete, please take it from here.
Yeah, sure. Hey, folks, I'm really excited to talk about managing hybrid sales organizations, distributed sales organizations today. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's probably something that everybody's had to get a little used to recently. Congratulations, we're throwing you in the deep end of the pool. Have fun. I hope you know how to swim. So we're going to talk about a little bit about how to swim better in that regard here today. And yeah, as Hannah noted, Atrium is sponsoring this event, my software company. And so in short, what Atrium does is it helps AE, SDR, and AMCSM managers use data and metrics to improve rep and team performance. It does that by monitoring dozens and dozens and dozens of key performance KPIs straight out of the box. And kind of one of the things that's like really particularly compelling about that is it takes about 90 seconds to set up. So for organizations that kind of been kicking the can down the road of like getting better at data-driven sales management and kind of using metrics to manage their teams, well, the good news is it takes like 90 seconds to set up, and you can see exactly what's going on with your team there. Cool. So a little bit about me. I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm the founder of Atrium, also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. I run our sales organization here at Atrium, and I've been doing sales leadership stuff for about a decade now. My background is actually in product management and product marketing, but about 10 years ago, in my last software company, TalentBin, recruiting software company, I was our first, I was a business generalist founder, and then I was our first seller when I've kind of figured out like, hey, this stuff doesn't sell itself. I need someone to sell it. Hey, first seller, first sales manager, first sales leader, and then eventually we were acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. I wrote a book on early stage sales called Founding Sales. It's essentially like the missing manual, kind of like early stage sales playbook there for founders, first time sellers, other kind of like first time sales folks. So I think a little bit about sales stuff, sales excellence, sales operations, sales management, sales leadership, et cetera. Some of kind of my favorite resources that I've been using recently are a couple of these books right here. The ones I've kind of been fans of recently has been there's the Qualified Sales Leaders written by John McMahon. It's really super fantastic. Kind of more, it's like on the birth of Medic. It's like really kind of a page turner. It's pretty super fun. Cracking the Sales Management Code is a little bit geekier, a little bit more kind of tactical in that regard. Really focus on metrics and data-driven sales management. It's probably like if Atrium was like a book instead of software, that would be an example of like what that would actually look like there. And then and then of course 5 secrets of a sales coach as well there. And so actually we have an offer right now that we're presenting to everywhere. Like if you want to go ahead and sign up for us to send you these books, just go ahead and hit the link that is being dropped into the chat right now in order to sign up to do that. So that should be pretty fun then. And then I think Hannah, you're going to drop that link into the chat room here. Cool. So let's get into the content here a little bit. We're going to be talking about hybrid sales organizations. We're going to be talking about instrumenting remote organizations. And I think one of the big things here is that there's kind of a new reality, what we call the virtual sales floor here, where when we surveyed 400 plus sales managers, we saw that about 90+% of sales teams are either fully distributed or have like a hybrid situation going on, where there's like a couple of offices, but then there's also a number of folks that are working from home, or maybe a little bit of both. Moreover, this isn't something that's going to change anytime soon. What we've seen is that about 70% of 70+% of managers are expected to grow that distributed team, and so this isn't changing anytime soon. And so as a result, like we got to get good at it. And so one of the challenges that we've observed when working with our customers and talking with people in the market is that there's a number of challenges that manifest as a result of this. Kind of twofold problems. One is like there's limited visibility, so it reduces the ability of managers and leaders to be able to like understand where problems are and like react to them in a timely fashion. And then the kind of like the yin to that yang is that there's communication friction. So like you might understand what's going on, or might understand that there's a problem, but then kind of communicating the resolution to that, or kind of like the fact that something needs to be addressed there, can be a little bit more challenging there. And so kind of some of these examples that around these problems is like, and we see this kind of across the board, is that oftentimes sales is a hard profession from an SDR standpoint, AE standpoint, what have you. It ends up being kind of like calorically intensive, and so people can oftentimes take their foot off the gas without kind of the esprit de corps and social accountability associated with a sales floor. And so there's a couple of things that can happen there. People can take their foot off the gas, people can work on the wrong things, balls can get dropped, etc. And so a lot of where these things kind of come from is kind of this removal of like social cohesion and kind of alignment that happens just kind of naturally, kind of being in the same environment. The other thing is that like what you're doing is you're removing the ability to do what I kind of call instrumentation by osmosis, where you're using your eyes and ears to understand what's going on the sales floor. And then so that actually gets compounded with this other thing, which is that most organizations have somewhat immaturity of kind of like management by metric, and so like all of these kind of create a bunch of different issues. And so this kind of being like a pretty primary one. And so the way that we have seen people successfully navigate this, we've done this internally at our organization. We've seen this with like our customers who are most successful in this, is really kind of in these 4 steps to being very successful. You got to use metrics as your eyes and ears. We'll talk about, and we're going to talk about these 4 steps in this presentation. So you got to use your metrics as your eyes and ears. You got to set and then track the appropriate goals on those metrics. and then on top of that, you actually have to have a really crisp day-to-day operating rhythm and kind of like operating cadence. And then lastly, even if you've got all of those three things, then what you have to do is be able to like get ahead of things, detect those issues, troubleshoot them, and then resolve them. So communicate the solution. And so if you do those four things successfully, you'll be able to run a really smoking hybrid sales organization. And so first, we're going to talk about kind of this step one here about using metrics as your eyes and your ears there. Cool. So the good news is that like using metrics as your eyes and ears is extremely like it's one of those cases where like the future is here, it's just not broadly distributed. There are organizations that use it extremely successfully, and it's just a question of and like so it is a known solution, and then it just becomes a question of whether or not you know uh, like putting the effort in order to do that. So kind of the benefits associated with being metrics driven here is that one, you can see what you can no longer you now can see what you no longer could with remote work. You can help coach your teams to be more effective using those metrics, right? So you can see what problems are, get ahead of those. You can also and solve those. You can also identify where things are being very successful, and then you can formalize that across your team. You can see where there's like pockets of success, kind of new innovation happening. And then moreover, you can really reduce kind of like the management of opinion and kind of issues that kind of come with that. So there's lots and lots of benefits associated with this. So then the question is like, okay, cool. If we're going to do that, like, what are the metrics that I should be using to do that? Here, let me just like plug in my headset here to make sure that you guys don't lose me. I don't think I've ever gotten a USB plug-in the first time, which is funny because you should be like it should be a 50-50 shot. Cool. So what metrics should I be using here? And then the question to answer that is, all right, well, there's a couple of questions you should answer to know that. One, what sort of teams are you instrumenting? Right? Because the metrics are going to be different based on the teams that you're paying attention to. If you're going to be looking, and then moreover, the same is kind of true with the time intervals associated with that. So if you're talking about it with, and like as an example, if you're talking about an SMB team, probably you're going to be looking at bookings on a monthly basis versus a quarterly basis. If you're talking about mid-market reps, it might be on a quarterly basis. If you're talking about inbound SDRs, this might be new opportunity created on a weekly basis. If it's outbound SDRs, it might be opportunities created on a monthly basis. So first, you got to think about like what the teams are that you're going to be instrumenting, and like what and kind of like what the relevant metrics would be, and also what the relevant time periods would be. The next thing you would want to think about is like, what do they spend their time doing, right? What ought they be doing? And so that kind of comes down to, is it an SDR team that should be call heavy? Well, probably we need to measure calls then, right? Is it an SDR team that's like email heavy because they are prospecting into into personas that are not call receptive and are maybe more email receptive? Okay, cool. Probably should pay attention to that. Are they account executives, and they should be, what we should be paying attention to is whether or not they're having meetings or not. These are the sort of things that we would want to ask. And so the way to think about this is like, what would you expect them to fill their calendar with? Okay. The next thing I would say is like, what can end up happening is people can kind of get in this analysis paralysis situation where they're like, hey, let's go to the whiteboard. Let's have a meeting about what metrics we're going to start measuring. And then like, let's get everybody's input. And so what ends up happening is just kind of like metastasizes into this like unmanageable thing versus just saying like, hey, you know what? We should start being very basic with a core set of metrics, get that live, start using it, and then we can extend that over time, right? Start with a smaller set of kind of like bunny slope metrics before progressing to double black diamond skiing. And then the last thing I would say is that like, honestly, don't overthink it. This is totally a solved problem, and unfortunately, a lot of organizations go about they reinvent the wheel, and they're like, oh, well, we need to have like a very, very special way by which we like define win rate versus just saying like, hey, this is how everybody defines win rate. right? Or we have these like very, very specific bespoke metrics that we need to pay attention to when they're not doing things like instrumenting the number of customer facing meetings their AEs are having. So what I would say is like, don't overthink it and just start. And you'll find that you'll be on your journey to being really data driven and instrumenting your hybrid sales organization in a successful way. So just to kind of like shortcut that for you, these are some kind of examples of different metrics you might want to think about on a role by role basis. And so again, this is covered in Cracking the Sales Management Code, but one way to kind of think about this is that there's like input metrics, and then there's like output metrics, and then there's efficiency and quality metrics. These end up kind of being like more like ratios, samplings, etc. So as an example for SDRs, the inputs that people are doing, we want to pay attention to inputs because inputs derive outputs. If we only pay attention to outputs, unfortunately, we won't know whether or not people are doing the things necessary in order to drive those outputs. So you got to do both. And so examples of inputs there for for SDRs would be things like, prospecting activity information, like emails, calls, and then maybe a little bit more sophisticated might be like the unique number of accounts or contacts someone's touching. And then if you wanted to get even more sophisticated, it might be things like new accounts, new contacts that are being touched, because obviously it's insufficient to say, hey, you know what, I'm sending a lot of emails to a bunch of contacts or a bunch of accounts or whatever. Yeah, cool, but are you like writing the same accounts that you have been for like 3 months now and they're burned out, and maybe you should be bringing new blood in there. Outputs, of course, there are going to be things like meetings created, ops created. Then if you want to get more sophisticated, it might be things like bookings sourced, right? It's insufficient just to say, hey, we're creating lots of opportunities. Yeah, cool, you are, but like, is revenue ultimately coming out of that? Because if it's not, that's probably something we should be worried about for our SDR team. And then there's a number of efficiency metrics as well. Things like that are related to those inputs, like, hey, what's our email responsiveness rates? Are we multi-threading appropriately? And then there can be quality metrics on outputs as well, like, hey, what is the win rate on sourced opportunities here? Is this SDR creating a bunch of opportunities that never close, whereas these SDRs over here, their opportunities never miss? And so these end up like, you don't want to necessarily skimp on the efficiency and quality metrics, because it can be a very important thing in order to troubleshoot why there might be a disconnect between inputs and outputs. Same on the kind of the AE side. The inputs and outputs end up being a little bit different there. With AEs, it's like, hey, do we have opportunities that they own? Do they have pipeline? But also importantly, is new stuff coming in, right? Do we have new opportunities and new pipe flowing in? And then are they actually working it? Right? Do we have customer-facing meeting volume? Are they touching their accounts, et cetera? Outputs are a little bit easier. Obviously, there's bookings, wins, and then forecasting metrics like expected revenue by close date, pipe by close date, et cetera, et cetera. But it's important to recognize that even like a forecast is actually a lagging indicator, right? People, usually what they want to do is they want to think about what their forecast looks like. But the problem with the forecast is that it's actually a lag on these inputs right here, like new opportunity inflow, customer facing meeting volume, opportunity progressions, et cetera. So it's important to do. You obviously have to do your forecast, but if for whatever reason your forecast, the thing that will tell you why your forecast is low or high, will be these inputs here. And so managing those end up being really important. And then of course the efficiency and quality metrics here would be things like win rate, the average selling price, deal cycle, and then also behavioral things too, like, hey, untouched opportunities, stuck ops, et cetera. And so importantly, what you want to do is you want to have a good mix of these inputs and these outputs. Like noted earlier, you can start with more basic things, like maybe the top couple of these on both sides, or excuse me, all three sides. And then as you get kind of more sophisticated, you can advance there. And this is a visualization here of kind of like how those various metrics interface with each other. So in the case of bookings, this is what we at Atrium call the kind of metrics driver tree, where bookings, where do bookings come from? They come from wins crossed with ASP and deal cycle. Where does win rate come from? Well, win rate comes from, excuse me, where does wins come from? Wins comes from win rates crossed with attempts. Okay, and then upstream from that, you have even more granular behavioral things. Like, oh, okay, well, where does win rate come from? Well, it comes from a variety of different places. It comes from opportunity stage conversion. It comes from whether or not people are doing a good job managing their pipe. Are they on top of their ops, et cetera? Oh, okay, well, like, where does ASP come from? Well, ASP comes from doing a good job of multi-threading, doing good, making sure that your op counts, or excuse me, the size of your ops in your pipeline isn't small, et cetera. And then the same is true with the average deal cycle. And so what you can do by having these metrics in place is you can kind of go upstream. And so if you have a problem, and we'll get to this a little bit later, where someone's light on their bookings pace. Okay, is it a win problem? Is it an ASP problem? Is it a deal cycle problem? Oh, it's a win problem. Okay, is it because they don't have enough at bats, or is it because their batting average, their win rate is low? Oh, it's because their win rate is low as compared to their peers. Great, let's go upstream and figure out what might be driving that. Where do they fall out in the opportunity, like in the pipeline? Where does it fall out, or are they not managing their pipeline sufficiently? And then of course you can do the same thing on the SDR side of things as well. So in order to get these metrics in place, you might say, okay, well, where am I going to get these where am I going to get this data from in order to make sure that I can ask these questions? And so the good news is that usually you should be able to automate a lot of that, like your sales engagement solution, whether you use like SalesLoft or Outreach or Mixmax or Groove or Apollo or what have you. They should do a pretty good job of logging this to the CRM. If you don't have it doing that like yet, I would hit up your CSM and be like, yo, let's get a better job of getting this information into the CRM so we can ask some questions of this. Of course, obviously specific tooling like Atrium can help with this as well, because we hook in all these different systems. And then there might be some situations where you actually do need to do manual data capture. And so one thing to kind of think about there is with your business process is like, do you really need to do these various pieces of manual data capture? And then moreover, can you refine things there? So a good example is like when we interact with a lot of organizations, they don't have their SDRs. Generally speaking, most organizations have their SDRs creating opportunities for account executives and like tagging themselves either on a source by field or being the creator. But some organizations will do kind of like more arcane things like, oh, okay, well, we're going to create this like task or custom object over here in order to signify that, in order to count that, and it ends up being all this brain damage that has like low adherence and like low compliance. Whereas like, what was the upside of doing that? As opposed to like, hey, why don't we just like conform with what everybody really just does and just like have the SDRs create the opportunity there? And so that kind of goes back to the don't overthink it thing, is where there's like very clear design patterns in the market. And so just adhering to those ended up being really helpful. If you want to get like way nerdier on metrics, cracking the sales management code is like a really fantastic resource for that. Of the kind of like books that I noted earlier, it's the one that's like the most focused on kind of like metric stuff. The other ones are kind of more on like the implementation and kind of like the coaching that comes out of it. But this is the one right here that's like really super fantastic for that. And again, if you're interested in grabbing one of these, I think we're going to drop a link in the chat room for that. Cool. So then the next step here is that I would note is like, once we've got these metrics in place, well, now we got to like set and then track goals, because it's insufficient just to have metrics in place. It's like, hey, congratulations, we're data driven. Well, now we actually have to like look at them because that's what's going to help us say, oh, there's a problem right here, or oh, there's outperformance right here, and then we're going to intervene in order to change things. And so one version of that is using goals. And so the reason why goals are so important is because, yes, we want to win, like we want to hit our bookings like goal, right? We want to, but the problem is that because winning or like a bookings goal or an opportunity creation goal is a lag on precursor behavior, Well, what we have to do is we have to get ahead to those leading indicators and not just set goals on like, hey, we want to get to 5 million in ARR, or we want to get to, you know, this amount of pipeline created by the SDR team. It's like, okay, well, what are the mechanisms by which you're going to do this? And so one of the examples I like to use here is that is from professional athletics, where you actually look at what these inputs are, right? And they're going to tell you what the outcomes are. So, like, use baseball as an example. We want to win. An output is going to be a run, right? Someone scoring. But then, importantly, in order to get runs, what we need is we need hits, we need bases, we need extra base hits. We know we need home runs. If we're on defense, we need strikes, we need strikeouts, right? We need pickoffs, et cetera. And then moreover, we need to measure these efficiencies. And so in what we need to do is not only help, like we were noting earlier, look at these inputs and these outputs and set goals on them. But then also the important thing is that it can't just be organizationally based. It actually has to be at a human level. And the reason why it's really important for it to be at a human level, like not at an organization level and not just at a team level, is because the people are the people doing the work, right? They are the fundamental unit of execution on your SDR team, your AE team, your AMCSM team. And so your bookings output goal is simply the summation of the bookings outputs from all of your different AEs. And so the bookings outputs for those individual AEs is the output of that new opportunity inflow, customer facing meeting volume, win rate, et cetera, for that person. And so if we want to be able to coach and get ahead of things and diagnose where there are issues, doing that at a team level or an organizational level hides our ability to intervene and solve those problems. And that's why it's extremely important for us to be at the human level, right, at the rep level, instrumenting those and implementing those goals. So then a couple of kind of principles of goal setting here. So first, what we want to do is we want to set those targets. The way that we would do that is there's kind of like a blend that you can do. You can do historical performance. This is one of the things that actually we end up doing in for our new customers is one of the things that ends up being really compelling is like they can quickly go back and look at their historical behavior, right? Like they may not have a sense of, hey, what actually is appropriate for opportunity creation on the SDR team? What actually is appropriate for customer facing meeting volume on the AE team? And so if you don't have those metrics in place, it's very hard for you to say like, hey, you know what, we should be having 15 customer facing, AE should be having 15 customer facing meetings, or AE should have 15 new opportunities flowing into their pipe a month. If you have those metrics in place, now you can do that. And that's good because like now those goals are like they're credible and data informed, and you're not just like pulling out of your ear. The other thing that you can do is you can use a bottoms up model, right? Where you can say, hey, you know what? There's 40 hours in a week. This is, we'll use an SDR as an example, or an SDR team as an example. There's 40 hours in a week. We have an expectation that we're doing this number of prospecting blocks right here. This is how many, we have this expectation around cadence execution. You should be doing this many, like the first touch on a cadence should be fully customized. That should probably take like 2 or 3 or 4 minutes there, like 3 things in 3 minutes or something like that, whatever methodology you use. Cool. And then all the other stuff is going to be automated. Okay, well, based on that, we would expect, given, 2-hour prospecting blocks per day, plus like internal meetings, et cetera. Okay, there should probably be like 20 hours of prospecting behavior per week, and then that would then net out to this many first sequence starts. And then moreover, if our sequences are executing appropriately, there would be this many follow-on emails, et cetera, et cetera. And then what would come out of that would be this expectation of this many opportunities that are being created that derive from those precursors. So that's one way of doing a bottoms-up model. Another example for like account executives might be, hey, like this many hours in a week, this is how our sales motion works. And we do 15-minute disco calls plus like 30-minute like mid funnel calls and like 30-minute closing calls. based on calendar behavior, and our AEs aren't expected to prospect. So based on calendar availability and what have you, we would expect this amount of meetings as an example. Or alternatively, like you have a different sales motion. Oh, we have an enterprise sales motion. Usually what that involves is like an alignment meeting with like the SE and the technical stakeholder, whatever. Usually those are about an hour and a half each. We're going to be having this many of those per week. There's this many disco calls. Okay, that's how many customer facing meetings this AE should be having. And then similarly, how much, like, what's the caloric input that is required in order to execute an opportunity? Oh, most of our opportunities, they're either going to close win in like in three customer facing meetings, or they'll close loss really quickly in one meeting. And so based on calendar availability and kind of the things that a rep has to do in between those meetings, our reps can handle 20 new ops a month, right? Versus opportunity management that is a little bit more calorically intensive. Like, oh yeah, each of our opportunities takes like 15 meetings in order to get across the line. Oh, okay, gosh. So then that's going to imply how many opportunities that an AE can manage. We have a couple of these models here that you can use to calculate these things. We'll go ahead and send this deck out after the fact, and you guys can look at some of those. And then the last thing that you can do is you can look at some benchmarks. And you can say, hey, this is something that we're really lucky to be able to provide to our customers, is because we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations that have connected their data to Atrium. We're able to anonymize that and say like, oh, okay, cool. For like your market right here, this is a good ASP. This is a good win rate. This is what people should be doing from their AE should be doing for customer facing meeting volume in a mid-market. This mid-market segment, it should be this for the SMB segment. Right. And so we're able to and getting that benchmark information can be a little bit challenging. Some of the consulting shops like the Bridge Group and some other folks will kind of do they have some good content on that. It's usually not like super connected to like what your market is and like what your sales motion is. But if you can get that information, it can be good. You shouldn't use it on its own though. You should blend it. Right? It's kind of like we take these three ingredients right here, and then we kind of like put it in a blender and like, and then what comes out of that is, hey, these are what we think are appropriate goals, again, that are defensible, data informed. We didn't just pull them out of our ear and like threw them on the wall and was like, all right, cool, SDRs, you should be making 50 ops a month. Oh, okay. Where'd you come up with that, Pete? It came to me in a dream, right? Good way to make your SDRs pissed at you. But instead it should be data informed and reasonable and defensible. But then what you can do is you can iterate them. Hey, we're going to take this first shot on goal here. Oh, look, like we have an expectation for this many opportunities that are being created by the SDR team, this much email volume, this much, and then because the SDRs are comped on a per opportunity basis, and Bobby figured out this really clever way to be able to do twice as much of that and have a higher efficiency. Lo and behold, he's like blowing his number out of the water. Well, maybe we like tune that number up just a little bit, right? But first we got to throw it out there, that initial defensible approach, and then kind of go from there. And so these are some kind of like examples of like some of what those benchmarks could look like. Depending on sales motion, it can kind of be like some of these benchmarks can be a little wide, right? Like customer facing meeting volume, like, hey, we all have 40 hours in a week, right? And so like those go to things like meetings and emails and accounts to touch or whatever. You can have like much higher variability in terms of like win rate or bookings or what have you. A little bit less on the SDR side, but again, the things that are precursors that are really just kind of contingent on how many hours there are in the week and kind of like what your prospecting or selling motion looks like, those are going to be a little bit more kind of like inarguable. But then you're going to get into kind of like on a per market basis, like email response rates will end up changing pretty substantially. The number of activities it takes in order to create an op might change, et cetera. And this is why kind of like benchmarks have to be mixed in with other things like the historical performance and what have you, because if you just like slap somebody else's benchmark on your organization, you might choose the wrong benchmark, and then you can end up with like kind of two bad situations. Either A, too high a goal, so you have people who are like demoralized, or B, also bad, too low a goals where everyone's like, hey, this is easy. Right? Like, what's on TikTok right now? I already hit my goal for today. Bye. Cool. So those are that was setting and tracking appropriate goals there. So next, what we're going to get into is establishing your operating rhythm. And so both of these here, number 2 and number 3, are really about like making sure that we're consuming this information and using it as a mechanism by which to change behavior, to intervene with these reps and these teams in order to win better, to do better. And so the second thing here is like, one, we're going to set and we're going to track those goals. Okay, well, how do we make sure that we're tracking them? And so really what that kind of comes down to is that operating rhythm. And so what you want to do is you want to weave this, these data-driven assets, into your operating rhythm. And so what that means is like lots of distribution. And so like an example, one of the jokes that we kind of talk about here when we're doing discovery calls with like sales operations people or what have you, it's like, oh, cool. So like you have a bunch of dashboards. Have you ever had a situation where you like jump into the dashboard that you like somebody asked you to make, and you took 4 hours and you made it, and then you look and see the last time it was refreshed, and then last time it was refreshed was like 3 months ago, and they're like, yep, that happened this morning. And so the important thing is like if you're not looking at these things, right, it doesn't count. Right, like if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, doesn't make a noise. If a SDR performance dashboard and an AE prospecting dashboard isn't looked at, are they actually doing the prospecting? Are they actually doing the work? And so this is why having distribution on this ends up being really important there. So a couple different places or a couple different ways you can do distribution. The good news is that in most modern kind of reporting packages, this is certainly the case with Atrium, also the case with Salesforce as well. Usually what you end up with is like a URL per report, right? It's like a hyperlink per report or per dashboard. And so what's cool about that, like the magic thing about hyperlinks, is that you can do all sorts of fun things with, like you can spread them across all your different assets. So like you can bookmark the heck out of them. Like I bookmark the heck out of mine. Like these are all the things that I end up looking at here to manage our business. But also you can put them into operating rhythm events, like calendar events. You can also, and this is less common as well. This is something that we focus very, very heavily on at Atrium from a product standpoint, is like making sure that this information is flowing outward. So it's going to meet people where they live, like in their email, showing up to them in Slack. And so making sure that these things come to managers, to like individuals, to reps, managers, et cetera, where they can't avoid it. You can't help but notice, whoa, that's weird. Bobby's way off as compared to everybody else. Like it's Thursday and Bobby has half as many emails sent as the other 15 SDRs. WTF, right? So that like rather than saying, hey, I really hope that that SDR manager went to that dashboard that I provided for him or her and then refreshed it and then did that analysis, if it comes to them in email, if it comes to them in Slack, then they see that and they go, oh damn, I need to intervene with Bobby. And right, and so now that's actually data-driven management is happening there, and the only way that that happens is if that distribution is happening, to make it unavoidable. The other places where you want to make sure that this is happening is creating forcing functions to make sure that consumption is happening. And so a really great part of that, a really great way to do this, is with calendar events, whether it's for an actual meeting or alternatively, it's like a block for you to do some work, right? There's like calendar events that are like meetings, and there's calendar events that are, it's like a reminder for yourself. And so let's talk about like meetings, which is an important part of like an operating rhythm. So like a team meeting, a stand-up meeting, a pipeline review meeting, right? Like you might have a specific metrics review meeting, an end of the week recap meeting. All of those, they serve a purpose. They serve like information communication purposes. They serve like alignment and kind of like esprit de corps purposes and what have you. But they also can provide a mechanism by which to like consume metrics and drive accountability there, if you do a good job of making sure that those metrics are present in those meetings. And so what that looks like is making sure that you have the appropriate supporting materials there, and then moreover, making sure that you as a manager or a leader are preparing for those meetings. So it's like there's the meeting, and then there's the there's the meeting block for you to prepare for that meeting and kind of consume that dashboard or those set of hyperlinks in order to say, hey, how are we doing on, we have a specific initiative right now around AE expansion prospecting. Okay, cool. That's an important initiative right now. Are we doing it? Well, the way that we would do that is make sure that we actually have metrics in place and reporting in place to see that, and then actually have the block on the calendar to look at that, such that when we show up to that meeting, we're like, hey, everyone, party time. Everyone's doing a great job on their expansion op prospecting. Congratulations. Beers on me after work. Let's go. Or the alternative, AE prospecting, it's going to be the alternative. Or the alternative is, some people are doing it, some people are not. Here, let's go ahead and look at this thing that I know the answer to because I prepped for it ahead of time. And hey, look at that. Susan and Frank are really setting the world on fire. Good job, Susan and Frank. High five, high five. For everybody else, I'm not going to mention you by name, but it's literally right there in my screen that I'm sharing. I really need you guys to kick this up a notch. I'd like you to schedule an hour on your calendar in order to execute some of that prospecting. Let me know when it's done. And so when that, like, now what we're doing is we're driving data-driven sales management and changing behaviors by virtue of the fact that we have those assets in place, and we gave ourselves space to consume that information and then make direction as a manager. So that actually ends up being really important. It's like make space. One of the things that we talk about on the Atrium sales team quite a bit is this notion of like calendar as destiny. And it's not just true with account executives and SDRs. Like you have to have space on your calendar to do the behaviors that are important. It's also true with management and leadership. You have to have space on your calendar in order to do these managerial behaviors. Part of which is consuming this information such that you can say, okay, pipeline management, looks like pipeline management is a huge problem. I want everyone to block an hour and a half next week, and in order to knock this out, and then we're going to come back and look at everyone's untouched ops next Thursday. Get excited, because if this number is where it is right now, I'm going to be real sad. and then there will be no beers for everybody as a result. So some examples of like what this looks like in practice here would be like shooting those hyperlinks through variety of assets. Like this is a meeting invite here where there's a bunch of hyperlinks and assets there. These are examples of like bookmarking, which this is before I started using emojis in my views. It kind of helped me be more rapid there. In navigating. And then this is like a sales team agenda document right here. This is like a screenshot of some of the sales team stuff that we or our agenda there. All these hyperlinks right here are hyperlinks to assets that help answer these questions. And then of course I have a half hour on my calendar to look at these ahead of time in order to say like, oh, hey, what deals came in? What's coming in this week? Do we have, are we hitting the goals that we need, et cetera, such that we can have those conversations live in that meeting. And I already know the answer there. These are some examples of like what these broadcasts would look like. So again, making sure that the information is coming to the managers, right? They don't have to think, hey, you know what? I really should go look at a dashboard right now. That sounds like a lot of fun. But instead, it's coming straight to them into their inbox where it's unavoidable, right? They can see it, right? They can't avoid it. And as a result, you're raising your likelihood that those managers are going to be able to do a good job of using that data to manage. This is an example of kind of like what a proposed operating rhythm might look like there. So we've got, this is a monthly one. So this is the days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've got our various meetings here. And of course, each of those would have metrics assets that would be tied to them. And then you might have different things on a week by week basis there. And then this is examples of like what you actually might do during those meetings. So like a midday stand-up is obviously a lot different than a sales team meeting. It's a lot different than a pipeline review. It's a lot different than a manager and rep one-on-one there. Each meeting has a different purpose. And so as a result of having it has a different purpose, it has a different time during the operating rhythm when it happens. And then as a result, what it would have is it would have different metrics assets tied to them. But what you want is you want all of these to happen, and then you want there to be metrics tied to them. And a really great way to do that, shockingly, is with software like Atrium. And so just kind of give you guys a little blurb on Atrium. We make what we like to refer to as data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers use data and metrics to improve their team performance. And really what the thought is there is that, look, managers need to be data driven. This is like table stakes nowadays. And the problem is it's just like way too hard, and managers aren't necessarily trained on these things. And so what we have done is we've said, hey, there needs to be a world where managers can have every KPI that's needed for their team, like every KPI that's needed for their AE team or their SDR team or what have you, already pre-baked. It's already done. They don't have to beg some sales operations person to make it for them. But then more importantly, all of those metrics are already being monitored for them. So, you can set goals and track progress towards them. But then the software just does that for you. And then moreover, it just monitors all of those various KPIs in order to tell you, hey, you know what? Looks like Frank is off on his opportunity creation pace this month. We got to get ahead of that. Because it's we're only halfway through the month right now, but his pace is looking bad. So like, let's get ahead of that and let's fix that before we figure it out after the end of the month, right? And then moreover, the software does actual root causing there as well. Like, to use an AE example, hey, it looks like it looks like Susie's is pacing poorly with respect to her bookings. Turns out it looks like it's a win rate problem. There's plenty of opportunities. ASP looks fine. It's really a win rate problem, and it looks like she's got a big problem exiting stage 3. Her conversion rate out of stage 3 is really off as compared to the other 20 AEs or the other 5 AEs in the organization. Seems like there's something going on in stage 3. You got to get in there and fix that, or else she's going to have a bookings problem going forward. And so this is essentially what Atrium does, is that we help sales managers use data to improve team performance in the way that I just kind of described. And the good news is that we do this with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies to help them level up their game there. So end of the advertisement there. We'd love to talk with you and set up an free Atrium account for you if that sounds like something that's appealing to you. It takes about 90 seconds. But just to kind of round things out here, what we're going to talk about here is kind of like the last step, right? What we call kind of like the tip of the pyramid, right? The top of like Maslow's hierarchy of data-driven sales management excellence. And really what that is like, it's detecting issues, because it's one thing to have those metrics set up and then to be consuming them. But now what we have to do is we have to detect issues. We got to figure out what's going on there in order to fix it. And then we got to fix it, right? Because as a manager, that's why you're paid the big bucks. So how do you do that? Well, first, what you have to do is you have to detect the issue, right? And so usually what that looks like is it looks like things that are like off, like something has changed. And so what that could look like is it could look like a rep who is off as compared to his past performance. Something has deteriorated. His win rate used to be this, it is now this, right? The customer facing meeting volume used to be here, it is now degraded like this. Their untouched opportunity amounts used to be down here, and now they're up here. Oh man, that's bad. Another way something can be off is it can be an individual that is off as compared to their peers. We've got 10 account executives. They all kind of cluster around here with respect to win rate. Whoa, that person's win rate's way lower. What's going on there, right? So like that person is off as compared to their peers. This can also be the inverse. We got everybody who's like clustered in here with respect to win rates. Yeah, they're like clustered between, the trailing 90 days. We got people who are like, anywhere between 16 and 22%. Whoa, this person's at 28% win rate. That's awesome. What's going on there? Can we get everybody else to have a 28% win rate? Is that just because they haven't closed out their ops? No, look at that. They don't have any stuck ops there. They're just like hitting the cover off the ball. I think we need to have a conversation to figure out what their magic sauce is here, so we can get everybody else to figure out to do the same thing. So first thing is like what we have to do is we have to look for things that are off. Then what we do is like once we found those issues, what we want to do is we want to like figure out what that root cause is, and then we talked about that a little bit earlier in the metrics tree. And so what that usually means is like going upstream, going right on those flow charts that we talked about before. So like if an SDR is having an op creation issue, Where's that coming from? Is it coming from a lack of activity? Right? Like, what does their email volume look like? What does their account touches look like? Oh, actually, they look fine. That's weird. Okay, so maybe it's, instead of it being a quantity issue, maybe it's a quality issue. What's their email engagement rate looking like? What's their connect rates looking like? Oh my gosh, their email responsiveness rate is like half of what all the other SDRs are. What the heck is going on here? Oh my goodness, they're using last year's sequences. Figured it out. That's a problem, right? Or alternatively, like, oh, actually, it turns out their email engagement rate's fine. Their account touches are fine. What's going on here? Oh my goodness, they're not engaging any new accounts. They're literally just looping back across all of their accounts and just like beating a dead horse here. Got it. Cool. We're going to show you how to log into your prospecting data source, and we're going to say, hey, you know what? You need to be adding new accounts and new contacts to your sequences here, because the reason why you're not getting any opportunities out of here is because you're just going over the same kind of like burnt ground again and again and again. But what we have to do is we have to go upstream in order to figure out what that root cause is. And then lastly, what we have to do is we have to communicate that. Right. So once we figured that out, it's like, hey, I think what I'm seeing here, and this is what's really fantastic about doing data-driven sales management. It's like literally right here. Like, I'm not making this up. I'm not here to be like the boogeyman. See what I'm seeing right here? Like, we can agree that there's an opportunity creation issue here. I think what I'm seeing here, though, is it looks like you're doing the work. So God bless, high five. You're doing the emails, you're doing the calls, you're touching the accounts. You see this thing right here? You're not bringing new, you're not lighting up new accounts. You're not engaging new accounts. You're not engaging new contacts. See how all the other SDRs are touching about 5x the number of new accounts that you are in the trailing 90 days. So the reason why that's problematic is because you're not engaging new folks. You're just kind of looping back across the old folks. Is there a reason why we're not doing that? Is there there's just something wrong with like, are you not getting provision there? Oh man, I just didn't really think about it. Okay, wonderful, no problem. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and let's make a commitment that what you're going to do is you're going to add this many more accounts and this many more contacts for the rest of this week. And then what we're going to do is we're going to loop back on this. Here, in fact, let's put a calendar reminder on the calendar right now. We're going to loop back and we're going to see if you've remediated that. Does that work for you? We're making a little contract here, right? Does that work for you? Yeah, it does work for you. Okay, wonderful. Let's do it. And then we loop back again. And we're like, oh, look, new contacts and new accounts have been taking care of business. Oh, look, opportunity creation has been resolved again. And so this is like the step that you have to do in order to do this data-driven sales management, which is really important for these hybrid organizations. And so again, these are really good assets for doing this. If you're looking for a problem, what you can do is you can go upstream to kind of figure out what's going on. So if you're trying to diagnose this and you see an issue, one of the things to kind of really quickly understand is like, does this look like this is an individual problem or is it an issue across the team? In the example I said earlier, there was an issue with an individual rep who wasn't engaging new accounts or new contacts. Okay, that's not broad across the team. We just have to fix it with this rep. Or alternatively, do you see something where there's like a change in the whole team behavior? Like, broadly speaking, email responsive rates are going down, or across the entire AE team, win rates are off, or deal cycles are elongating. Well, if that's the case, then we have to invest. Like, that's not a rep problem. That seems like that might be like a motion problem or a market problem or whatever. You still have to figure out what the answer is, right? And then what we have to figure out is like, is it a skill problem or is it a quality of execution issue, oftentimes known as a skill issue, or is it a will issue in terms of just like level of execution there? If it turns out that it ends up, irrespective of which of those it is, whether it's a skill issue or a will issue, the way that we do that is the way that we solve that is by having performance conversations that align with these kind of like these criteria right here. And so I'm not going to go through all of these. Again, this is a really helpful resource that people can use to kind of use to do data-driven coaching, which is really important for those hybrid roles. But the idea here is like, you gotta have those conversations. It's insufficient to say like, oh, I saw this thing, I figured out the issue, but then I didn't have the conversation, because guess what? They're not going to change their behavior if like you know what the issue is there. So kind of to recap, I think we're coming up on time here, but like, these are the 4 steps that you really want to use in order to manage those hybrid or fully remote organizations. You got to use metrics as your eyes and ears. And then moreover, you got to you have to consume those things. So set and track the goals, and then establish your operating rhythms and a mechanism by which to ensure that you're consuming that information. And then once you're consuming that information, you have to sniff out what those problems are, come up with hypotheses around how you can solve it, and then resolve them. Again, like noted previously, these are some really great assets that kind of help with that. It's like a trio of very helpful things. Like this one's super left brain right here. This 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach is like really right brain. It's all about like the communication component of it. The Qualified Sales Leader is more about kind of like deal centric coaching and what have you. It's also really feel good. John McMahon tells great stories, and of course the Coffees for Closers mug is actually just fantastic for caffeine. So if you'd like to go ahead and get one of the get this pack right here, I think Hannah's going to be dropping a note in the chat there. Just go ahead and sign up. And I hope everyone had a really good time learning about how to manage hybrid sales organizations. If you have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can hit me up at my work email address, pete@atriumhq.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Pete Kazanji. Cool. I think we
Awesome.
made it,
Thanks,
Hannah.
Pete.
Barely.
Yes, we did. Honestly, like I'm so impressed you got through all that content in 60 minutes. We're going to wrap things up, like Pete said, but we want to thank everyone for attending. We loved having you here. I loved the engagement in the chat. Sorry we didn't get to some of the live questions. I'll work with some people behind the scenes to get you answers to those. Loved having you here. Thanks to Atrium for sponsoring. They're doing really awesome things. Check them out. Thank you to Pete for providing this amazing content. The recordings and key takeaways will be available on our site shortly. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events. Stay safe, and we will see you next time. See ya, everyone.